My name is Jenny Phelps. I work for the Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group. I've been there for 15 years now. And for the last 5 years, I've been on the E.L.M's engagement group. And I'm on all 6 thematic working groups and have been right from the start since Brexit. And because I come from a farming family, very passionate about the countryside, that I felt it was really important for farmers who care about the environment to be represented in this extraordinary time of change for the farming community. So what I'm going to present to you today is what we've learned over the last 4 years around where DEFRA is, where we think we would like it to get to, and how we're at this cusp almost between the opportunities being missed or the realisation of other opportunities that we're trying to find. So that's the context, and I hope you find it interesting. Some of it, I apologise, is very complicated, but I'll try and make it understandable as I can. So what I'm trying to do today is to set out this idea of a shared vision. Many of us here, many of the people who are represented by organisations like Groundswell, have a vision where we could actually solve a lot of the world's problems, which I'll come on to in a minute, particularly by driving regenerative agriculture that produces healthy food and all the other public goods and services that we know need to be delivered. So I wanted to cover that because it's part of this global challenge, the nexus. How do we have a growing population, mitigate against climate action? How do we solve the biodiversity crisis? And how can we do that in a way where we can all cope with eco-anxiety and take local action in a really meaningful way that means that we can actually go home, do something constructive, and feel we're part of this bigger global initiative that we could replicate around the world. So what I also want to highlight is the risk to the countryside that I've grown up in and that I love, and that the culture, the working farms, the landscape, the wildlife that's dependent on the way we farm the land is all at risk if we get this wrong. And it's really important for us to continue to highlight how we not only need to get the best from DEFRA, but we need to have all of the opportunities to join up across government, across the Department of Business, Energy and Infrastructure, and all the other drivers around policy that create dynamics and change. And we want it to be real, and we want it to be verified, and we want action to be bottom up. So we'd like to support DEFRA and other organisations, so this is not a criticism. It's around trying as a group of organisations to try and say, can we do this? Can we do this together? And can you value us as farmers as a key part of that? And can you make us and enable us to take action at a local level to be able to have this wider ambition? So what we are in, as we all know, is this climate crisis. It's a global, it's almost too big to think about in our own minds. It's like, how on earth do we solve this? And there's a lot of international research going on about this global nexus. How do you create an opportunity to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals, all of the ambitions through Europe, all of the idea that we have to feed the world, but there's all these other challenges around biodiversity and climate. And it's really regarded as being almost the unsolvable problem. But I honestly don't believe that it is. And many other people feel that we really have an opportunity to do this, but the opportunity is now. And if we don't act now in a collective, joined up and respectful and valued way with all of our farming communities and communities around the world, we won't achieve it. So where we are in E.L.M at the moment, I'm not going to delve into the depths of E.L.M design itself because that's all available for you. So we have the headlines, don't we? So we have the Sustainable Farm Incentive, we have Nature Recovery, which is the second stage, which is looking a bit like the farmer groups and facilitation funds, and we have the headline of Landscape Restoration. And we know that they've been under these strands around exploring sort of 6 strands around advice, spatial prioritisation, innovation, land management plans, and have these themes around payments particularly. And it's the payments that is the tragedy, because 4 years ago, we were trying to say to them, let's do something globally innovative. You've broken us out of the Europe. You've stood us alone as a nation. We have over decades of time where the United Nations and the World Trade Rules have been saying, let's do something different. Let's not get stuck on income foregone and commodity support. And unfortunately, at the moment, DEFRA has not gone down the path of being innovative, however much a huge group of organisations have tried to make them do that. We still feel there's a chance for this to be rectified, but unfortunately we now have to create another mechanism which actually enables us to pay farmers enough money to be able to look after and be the guardians of the landscape, but that might come through at a county level now. That's the only way we can get around this, the world trade challenges that have been put because we're negotiating all these deals that are still unfortunately tied to antiquated world trade rules. So that opportunity seems to have currently been missed, which is a great shame. but we still think there's opportunities how we can get around that. So at the moment, our job, and my lovely team are here, we're going out on farms every day, and we're finding people who are completely confused. You know, where is the message? What do you want us to do? Where's the direction? You know, where are we able to sort of like make a business decision? What are we going to do with our land? How can we, you know, public goods, what are they? But what about food? What about this ridiculous idea that you get food from somewhere around the world that's actually just passing on your environmental degradation to other parts of the world? And at the moment, there's currently 19 different funding streams that the government has put out. And our job as advisors, and I can list, and they keep coming, okay? So, and it's really difficult because for us as advisors, we're all actually really challenged because we get told there's a pot of money for our farmers. We have to rush home, Joe and I know this well, amazing, and actually, you know, frantically bid for money and then try and spend it in a short space of time. But there's no join-up, there's no design, there's no system, there's no connectivity, and there's no information for you to make those business decisions. You know, do I go into a carbon trading now? Is it verifiable enough? Do I feel the integrity of that? Do I go into E.L.M? If I go into countryside stewardship, does that preclude me from private companies investing in my land? What about biodiversity net gain? What does that look like? And there's no clarity. What people need is support and advice through this maze of complexity that the government is throwing out to people at the moment. So the risk to me and what drives us as a team is the fact that we all come from countryside backgrounds. We understand that people will be making business decisions to survive, to keep their businesses going, to be able to find our way through to keep their land or to keep their businesses going. And the complexity of the governance of farmland and the management of farmland makes that very, very complicated if you're a tenant or a commoner or you're somebody who's in contract farming as part of your business. So we've actually done an economic study in Gloucestershire. I work for the Gloucestershire Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group. We work very closely, as you'll see, with our economic partnership and our universities. And they've done a study that says that the actual economic loss that we suggested, could you find out what is the economic impact of BPS loss for Gloucestershire, just for Gloucestershire? And so we've discovered that it's £40 million is what's been coming into Gloucestershire every year. And over the degradation, or whatever the right word is, the diminishing amount of BPS, that's £180 million that won't be coming into Gloucestershire alone to 2027. And what that risks to me is all sorts of complexities. It's the culture of the people that have grown up in places. It's the web of the rural community. And actually, we had this opportunity to do something so much more dynamic, but it looks like E.L.M isn't at the moment going to be more than a simple agri-environment scheme. And what we really need to do is to create a framework where we can be investable from multiple different sources in a strategic way rather than in this sort of scattergun approach. And the one thing that we really feel in the vision that we all share is that if we get this right, we could also crack that really big thing, which is food equality. So I'm going to show you some quite complicated slides behind what we think is the solution. But to do that, it's about understanding how we think E.L.M could be designed, where you could go home and you could map your land like you do for BPS, which I'll explain, and then you can actually enable a platform for co-investment from lots of different organisations to realise the opportunities. So in our E.L.M trial, it was the most painful thing to actually get an E.L.M trial. It was nearly 3 months of paperwork to be involved there in September 2019. And what we wanted to do was to say, is there a methodology that we can actually use to assess our natural capital? And can we do that in a way to make sure that we can actually build a platform for investment that benefits farming and the communities that they serve? And why we champion the role of an advisor is not because we think there should be people paid lots of money to take bits of the budget from the 2.1 million or billion or whatever. It's about having somebody who can facilitate that funding for you from all those different sources. So we're trying to find a scheme that the advisors are not funded from the RDP budget or the Year of England programme, but is actually funded through local authorities, which would mean that the money doesn't get put away to advisors. But actually, without those advisors, you don't have that opportunity for join up and shared delivery. So what we learned very quickly was that there's a very innovative system that's been developed by some brilliant ecologists over 20 years called the UK Habitat Verification System. and it's already used for the DEFRA biodiversity metric. So it makes sense for E.L.M to be designed on the same mapping system as the biodiversity metric. That's one thing. But what's super clever about this is the fact that it can be translated from all the way that you currently assess your land. So if you've been doing a BPS claim, or you've got an HLS scheme, or you've done a farm environment plan, or you've used other survey methodologies, it can all be translated into one simple mapping methodology. And it's also super clever because it actually enables you to not only say what's going on the land, so what the habitat type is on the land, but how you manage the land. And we've been working with Rothamsted and the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology to attribute proxy measures or ways that you farm the land, a bit like some of the carbon accounting is being done now, to actually get science to verify if carbon's being captured, and science to tell us if pollinators are being served, and science to tell us whether water is being attenuated. So the idea that we have with SFI is that it's a real missed opportunity. If you don't pay a farmer enough to engage in E.L.M, but if you do pay them enough, like you do with BPS, you can highlight and elevate the amount of environmental data that you're collecting in a way that means that we can actually start this opportunity for co-investment. So this is what a UK habitat map looks like on one of our trial farms. We had 20 farms. We've now done 150 farms because we've also done it for the Land Workers Alliance trial. Lots of other organisations around the country doing E.L.M's trials have also suggested using UK habitat mapping because it's such a brilliant tool for us assessing the land. What we want to do is to encourage the government to create this starting point. Without this starting point, we don't have an environmental baseline. We don't have an opportunity to do things like get the investment from 3 trillion tonnes from one pension fund into carbon if we don't do it in an organised and verified way, because at the moment there is a lack of real-time data. And what we also wanted them to understand is that there's, at a local level, we can take meaningful action. We don't need to worry about all of the fact that there's all this other stuff going on, and be confident that behind what we're doing, there's a system that feeds us into this global opportunity for everyone to take action. And for over 15 years now, we've been trying to show how that the only way we're really going to solve this, particularly if policy doesn't catch up, is to have people out there to enable communities to act and to act now. And I regularly go into parish councils and groups of farmers, and I'm like, would you like some help understanding how you can get funding from your authorities? Can you work out how you might become more resilient to grow local food? How do you diversify? How do you get the funding for your new min-till drill or your local abattoir? And actually, it's about having somebody who can bring together all those partnerships that exist, but actually conduit that down to the ground and make real sense of that, but linking to these wider global and European and local strategies. So one of the things that we have discovered is that it must catalyse this co-investment. They've said they're only going to put, 2.1 billion or 2.8 billion, from the government into E.L.M. But we know there are trillions of pounds of carbon, that we said, and this is just a sort of like a stack, I suppose, of some of the opportunities, and there's more because I showed you a few more at the beginning. But actually, the baseline of that is so important. We have to have that baseline. One of the things that is extraordinary in the framework that we use is the release of social capital. It's the willingness of people to act. So many people want to take action. They don't know how. They don't know how to do it in a meaningful way. We have had 120 volunteers, haven't we, planting shelter belts we've had £250,000 worth of voluntary contribution from 20 communities who basically said, let's go out, let's clear our ditches, let's work out how the water flows, how do we protect our soil, how do we stop the village flooding, let's plant some trees, let's restore some hedges, let's do some hedge laying. And actually, those people are then engaged with the idea around regenerative agriculture and buying local food. So the social capital and volunteer contribution is the resource of humanity to actually get on with part of this change. And then obviously we've got the other mechanisms, the biodiversity net gain that's coming on board, this ambition to have 10% not loss of biodiversity linked to planning. We've got all the water companies, the payments for ecosystem services, the management of phosphates. You've got the carbon trading. And then you've got this whole raft of green finance investors who want to be transformative, who want to say, we've got money. How do we change this? And this is what we need to catalyse. And what we don't need E.L.M to do is to be so constrained that you stand in the way of these opportunities. And the only way we're going to do that is to attribute function to the land, to be able to say which parts of it are being delivered by who, and how we stack those enterprises for delivery. So part of what we really feel is the direction, and obviously the E.L.M nature recovery element of it is led by a lovely lady called Ellen Brown in DEFRA. She's brilliant, and she's really on the page with this. So I'm not just talking pie in the sky. We're talking daily to DEFRA about how they can get around the world trade rules and how they can create these local solutions. And they really picked up that the facilitation fund, the groups of farmers working together, the farmer clusters, whatever you want to call them, is a brilliant way to go. And when you start doing the UK habitat mapping across landscapes and catchments, you can start to run algorithms across these very clever data codes that show you the land and the land management, and you can look for provisioning gaps. So we can survey across the land, run an algorithm and say, what's the pollination provision? What's the water provision? How much carbon can we capture? So you're creating this opportunity, and more farmers are coming together to realise that if they're going to be investable and get more than just an income foregone-based E.L.M payment, coming together as groups of farmers working with parishes, which I'll come on to, assessing their land and linking to these wider partnerships is an opportunity for enormous investment in this regeneration and climate action. So we link all of our work directly into neighbourhood and parish planning. So we want to demonstrate that farmers are part of the community, that you can't have a planning system where you're going to build millions of houses without being able to quantify and be able to look at the mitigation and actually invest. And what we found over the last 10 years is virtually every community has derelict infrastructure. We've got water going down into the roads, into communities, flooding communities. Nobody's looked at the ditches, nobody's looked at the drains, nobody's looked at the underground infrastructure. We've got roof runoff going into foul systems. We've got sewage surcharging in our rivers. But actually every community can quite simply survey that land, look at all of the different infrastructure elements, work with their farmers around the landscape and look at how they can become resilient for those things, including food provisioning, and actually start to take action in a way that then disseminates the stuff that needs doing to all the areas of duty of the partnerships that are already in place. So it's an opportunity for relocalisation to be structured in a way that enables you to actually deliver against these wider policy frameworks. So as I say, what we're really hoping, this is my hometown of Cirencester, where we found over 1,400 infrastructure issues. This currently pumps sewage into the river every winter from November, or tankers from November through to March. And we know what the issues are. We know there's 300 houses that are misconnected. We also know that there's a whole catchment above it of willing farmers who want to help how to manage their soils and to create wetlands and to put in hedges and shelter belts and plant trees within the landscape and actually do regenerative agriculture. We just need to have the conduit, and we want E.L.M to enable us to catalyse that. And in its current form, this is where I really see that the local nature recovery, the landscape recovery, that's the third strand of E.L.M, needs to be more ambitious. It's not about just taking a nice valley and enabling it to rewild and say, oh, look, we've restored a bit of ecology. It's about saying, look, we want to pitch out to the world that our county, and this is just a case study of our county in Gloucestershire, we have a nature recovery network. We've assessed the land. Our farmers are giving us real-time data to be able to tell us what is the state of our environment. And we want to set up a trust, which we've just got funding for, like Oxfordshire, a brilliant example, where we can aggregate all that funding and we can start to understand and attribute function to the land and enable that co-investment to take place. And if you're part of a group of farmers who can then go to those organisations and say, yeah, we actually want to help with flooding for our community. We want to help provide local food. We want to stop, phosphate in the water because we've got a farming system that is not only, brilliant about the way that it regenerates the landscape, but actually produces food as well. And that's what I'll come on to in a minute, which is what Tamsin was going to talk about. Now, this is a critical piece of legislation. So the Environment Act, when it comes, is going to be transformative for the reason that the county councils who are being pushed out from government to deliver a lot of the duties around the environmental issues are going to have to demonstrate that they buy services and products that come from sustainable sources. And for our farmers who are less on the regenerative journey, they need to really watch this bottom one, because we don't know what the polluter pays principle looks like yet, but we know that it could be in quite a challenging form. And as Janet was saying yesterday, there's a lot of work around regulation, and there's a lot of people who think it's no longer acceptable for agriculture to play its part in pollution, and that is a whole industry-wide thing, not just agriculture. But what this does is this sets a new precedent that actually at a county level, how are they going to be able to verify, if they don't have this environmental data, how the goods and services that they're buying are actually going to be delivered, and how are they going to deal with health, equality, housing, infrastructure, flooding. And so through data and geospatial data, that we are actually really able to now say, this is the state of our environment. We have real-time data from our farmers and communities, and this is what we're going to systemize with the RPA and DDTS in our phase 3. So we're going to take this up to a whole county level real trial, hopefully with the DEL quite soon, if we ever get the paperwork through DEFRA. But we can also, with geospatial data, we can actually compare and contrast that, so we can make societal choices, how we can actually, where to put the houses, and if we put the houses here, does that displace food-producing land, and does it have an impact on our biodiversity? But without these choices, without this information and the actual verification of that environmental baseline, we're running, blind. I mean, you can hear the skylarks. It's not recorded anywhere. Just, build over here. Actually, you and I can actually give the data of what is on the ground and how we can do that in a really good way. So the thing that's super exciting to me is that the Geospatial Commission didn't know that we were doing all this work, and have actually tasked DEFRA in actually finding a way to, how do you get this data from the ground? Because we found that the actual environmental data that exists is actually really out of date. It's from multiple different sources. It hasn't really have any form of verification, certainly no accurate species data. And actually what they've been tasked with, the Geospatial Commission, is going across the government departments and saying, okay, how are you going to deliver this? We have the most enormous technology now. We have phenomenal technology that can help us. And that we have got to quantify all of that data with the real world. And that's what we as farmers offer. And that's what E.L.M needs to facilitate, that we can play our part in a way that actually builds this up as something real from the ground, rather than something that's just mapped or strategies. I'm sorry about the complexity of this. But this is basically how it could all join up. And if you have a look down here, this is something that our integrated framework's been talking about for a long time. It's about enabling local action. It's about you being able to go home and going, gosh, that woman talks a load of complicated stuff. But I understand that if I look after my farm and my farmers around me, and I look after my community, and I do it in a way that links and understands the catchment-based approach and the strategic priorities, the local nature partnerships, what everybody wants to do in that area, then we can be the conduit for delivery to actually go out and deliver this stuff and actually affect this change. And that what that then does, if we take that up to the district level, you can't quite see the districts are in here, and the climate emergencies, there's funding coming out from the climate emergencies. The county councils are going to have those duties around the Environment Act that we've said, so they're going to be listening, and they're going to, gosh, how do I do that? And a really interesting thing for me is I was talking to the Green Finance Institute the other day, and they were saying the county council will be buying your services for delivering public goods because of the Environment Act. So if you want to take a message home, think about what you can deliver in your local area, with your community, with your other farmers, and think about these how that fits in with the plans in your area. Don't worry too much about anywhere else. Just go for your catchment, your plan, your water bodies, your communities, the structures that support you and where you live. And that is really important if you integrate within that the economic partnerships, because they're challenged and have a much more money and will be conduiting a lot of the money from people like Bayes and all the others that have far much more money than DEFRA. So I suppose my message is DEFRA is here, but actually there's all of this over here, and don't miss that opportunity. And the biggest thing we have to do is to stop policy drivers from departments, in other government departments, saying, oh yeah, miscanthus is far better than building soil carbon because we've got the evidence that miscanthus sequesters carbon. We've got to really keep working with these other government departments to show how, as farmers and communities, we can actually deliver all of this across government, and we can integrate growth, and we can solve that nexus of people and food and equality. So the food equality bit for me, it's really, really important. And I think that I would really like to I'm doing this on behalf of Tamsin, and I really hope that one day you get to hear her speak, because she's amazing. And that there's a fantastic initiative that's basically driven by Sustain and many others, called Sustainable Food Places. And in Gloucestershire, what we want to do is show how this might be a reality, that we could have affordable, nutrient-dense food for everyone that is linked into these wider strategic objectives. So it's creating this opportunity for regenerative agriculture. If you have a look at some of the ambitions around the Sustainable Food Places, that it really is very concurrent with what I've been saying around taking a strategic, collaborative approach. It's about building awareness, and it's about citizens taking action. It's about overriding food poverty. It's about diet. It's about health, and all of those things. And we want to have, and we all want to live in a diverse, prosperous, thriving communities that are delivering healthy landscapes for the next generation who feel passionately about this. And we have to do this transformation now, and we have to do it in a way that is inclusive for everyone, and that all the good quality food that we produce is not unaffordable for 90% of society. So if we start to be able to work with what we've been doing on our E.L.M trial and monetize those public goods and services, then actually maybe, I'll come on to it a bit later, we can actually crack food inequality and make affordable, good quality food for everyone. And the most important thing is that we can become resilient, which we saw with the COVID and the pandemic. You know, there was that dodgy moment, wasn't there? Oh, where are we going to get our food from? Oh, good, I've got a local shop, local farm shop. And it's like, oh, that's okay. But, what happened to the rest of the supply chain? And for a moment there, we all learned some strong messages. So in Gloucestershire, we've been really lucky. We've got £500,000 worth of funding from 30 Percy, which is an environmental trust, and we have the huge support of a collaboration of environmental trusts for the Farming the Future. And we're trying to crack this nut, not only around local food and food equality, but around dynamic procurement. Who do you sell your food to? Actually, if you look at post-economic recovery, post-COVID, that all the money is going to go to schools and hospitals and health. And actually, if those county councils have got to have a duty to supply, to buy that food, but actually they've also got that environmental duty to have it coming from thriving landscapes, maybe we can actually start to look at how we can get our local authorities to buy food from our own landscapes, which was previously unaffordable. So there's this extraordinary opportunity that we're working, which Tamsin is leading on, which is about how do we join up our local enterprise partnership, our county councils, and follow dynamic procurement. And we're working on a £1.5 million schools contract to try and see whether we can get healthy food, delivering these public goods from regenerative agriculture into our schools and hospitals. So it's a collaboration. We all want to do this. Well, we all do. And I just think it's just such an amazing time, because this vision that we have is real, and it's touchable. And I think that's why it's so exhausting, because we can see this is real. It could actually happen. And that we have this opportunity to be completely, to reboot, as Colin Tudge was saying yesterday. We need to reshift. It's a paradigm shift. It's a different way of thinking. And all these wonderful people, are part of this vision. That what we're working so hard on is to be a replicatable case study that every other county, and many other counties are doing good things as well. So please don't think we think we're, any better than anyone. We're just here to share what we're doing and hope to learn from others. But this is just really, really important stuff. And if we get it right, we can influence DEFRA through E.L.M to say, get that environmental baseline, put support behind advisors in that nature recovery element to get those groups of farmers who can then be able to deliver this with multiple funding that integrates across economic, industry, all the housing and all the other things that we want, but actually each community taking that action. And so there's this enormous vision that we could do this, as I just said. So it's really important to me. And I think that this idea that, we're going to be producing this beautiful food, and that only those of us who have been lucky enough or privileged enough to have access to it and can afford it, is something I find truly worrying. My daughter works with homeless people in Manchester, and she says, Mum, they can only afford lentils. And it's like, it's just wrong. And I'm really sorry. And at the moment, E.L.M is actually going down the route that if you're a large landowner and that you own a load of land, that's brilliant, and we're going to pay you loads of money to have a nice ecological recovery. Fantastic. I'm not saying that's wrong. But what about everyone else? And I want a society where I think that it should be amazing for us to be able to actually, put this sort of food on the plates of children in every school. And it's not out of reach. It really is not out of reach. And this is just, I don't know if you sort of understand what this is trying to say, but I don't know if you know lovely Hilary Chestermaster at Abbey Home Farm. Her organic free-range chickens and herbal lays, the cost of production is £17 a chicken. But that land is delivering, air quality, water quality, pollination, flood benefit, biodiversity, all these things, but they're not monetarised, they're not rewarded. So, I have to my husband still slightly swallows hard when I pay 20 quid for a chicken. But he does it because he understands how important it is. But a lot of people can't pay £20 for a chicken. But if we can end up getting this, and we have this law behind us coming in with the Environment Act, and we can quantify and go from that chaos, that slide I showed you with all these, thousands of bits of funding being thrown out and us scrabbling around like lunatics trying to catch it, then, this is silly, because we need a systems approach where we can all act, and we can all act now. And that, to me, is really important. So I suppose to sort of finish off, just to say, firstly, thank you for listening to me, but also that there is a point here that I think I've sort of summarised what I've learned over the last 5 years since we've been very dedicated to trying to get E.L.Ms in the right direction, is that if you create SFI as being a broad and shallow, it's not going to be that. It's going to be a bit onerous, it's income forgone, and it's actually, doesn't have any mapping to it. You've missed a huge opportunity to get that environmental baseline. Really, really missed it. So wonderful people like Julia Aglianby, who I work with as a trustee for the Foundation for Common Land, she's really working with Janet to try and say, come on, map Cumbria, map these places, because you can't expect a hill farmer to just say, the way forward, by the way, is to have half the number of sheep, and we're just going to compensate you for the half the number of sheep. It doesn't work. If you can actually say to them, look, your landscapes are amazing, and they're delivering all these public goods, and we want to reward you as guardians for that, then we need to know what are the functions and services of that land. So let's map it. And she's making some progress. And apparently lots of people, as I said earlier, are now using UK Habitat, and you have to credit Bill and Joe for that. I mean, it's the most phenomenal mapping system. UK Hab is just, as I just said, it's phenomenal. And it's unique because it's got these management codes. And a lot of the scientists are attributing function. And I think a lot of us feel slightly uncomfortable around some of the carbon trading because it says, oh, it's okay, you go to Mintilt, it's bound to capture carbon. We're like going, but I'd really like to know, because if it doesn't, we're all buggered. So, so it's like, it's really important to me. And that DEFRA have done this thing where they've been, brilliant at recruiting young, dynamic people fast-track from universities. But when I was sat in a room in Birmingham in 2016, all of my 25 years' experience was being questioned by a young lady who'd got a degree in history and saying, oh, do you think we need a plan of a farm to start doing E.L.M? And you think, well, gosh, that was a blank sheet of paper. Gove's vision was actually wasted as 3 years in a climate emergency, because those young people are very passionate to help, but they didn't have the expertise. We worked out in the E.L.M's engagement group, we have over 1,000 years' worth of experience between us, in actually delivering schemes, learning, listening, joining it up. So it's really about, making sure that they understand. They didn't even have Natural England around the table at the beginning, and I love DEFRA, I'm not being critical, they do now, and they have listened, and they are being inclusive. We need to integrate this funding, and we need people out there, not to go and give you a big bill to sort of, fill in a map for you. We need people to help you be the conduit for that funding for you, for transition, because there's this massive gap where I fear that a lot of the farmers that I know and love will be really challenged as to how they're going to get through this. We have the most phenomenal resources of mapping at our fingertips. I work with an amazing young woman called Kitty Rose at Ordnance Survey, Head of Environmental Strategy for Ordnance Survey. We have the whole Geospatial Commission behind us. We have the Green Finance Institute. All these people saying, actually, we can do this. We've got the data. We've got all of this. But the data we don't have is the farm data. We don't have what is going on your farm every day and how you're doing that. And an annual submission, like a BPS, it's not complicated. We can just do it in simple codes. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than BPS. would enable us to have an annually updating. Technology is so clever now that if you input the data of your farm, then the whole baseline gets auto-generated and put up. So that's why we're going to be working with the Geospatial Commission, and we're going to be working with a Rural Payments Agency and with the Department of Digital Transition, DDTS. So many acronyms, I can't remember what it is. But that's really important to me because actually we have this technology and we have this alignment of data. We've even got GCHQ, so we can do this from satellite. I mean, we're working with Reading where we can monitor the water holding capacity from satellite and link that to the herbal ley trials that we've been doing. We want to realise this vision and sort of monetize this because actually at the end of the day we can't do any of that without investment. You know, we can see the vision, but as businesses and as farmers, how do we get there and who's going to help us? And at a time when they should be investing us in this transformation, they're withdrawing money from us at a time when we need that. So we need this to all be done. And we want to accelerate this post-COVID because actually what we could do is we can recycle the money they have got into these wonderful regenerative landscapes where we can do dynamic procurement. But, you know, and we need to have this verification of the soil farm carbon code. So for me, it's this opportunity for us to draw all this together. Still is an opportunity within E.L.M. But I still feel that you need to plan and to be collaborative with your neighbours and your communities at a local level so that you can take action anyway. And please don't be like many farmers we meet saying, oh, it'll be fine when E.L.M comes, because E.L.M really isn't where you need it to be at the moment. It can still be there, but it's going to have to come through a different route because at the moment, because of the world trade negotiations and because of the things that are going on, that actually the income forgone plus costs is about as good as it can get. And Lynn and Janet, Lynn Phillips is the other DEFRA director, you know, would love to change it, but they are constrained by things beyond their control to enable that to happen. So I hope that's been interesting, and just as how I represent a huge number of people who are all contributing to this. And I've got some time, I think, Joe, for questions. I don't know, have I overrun? I don't know. And I'd be really interested in your thoughts as to what you think about this and how you think we can take it forward so that we can make it a reality in more places. Thank you. Anybody got any questions? Yes, thank you. Oh gosh, good, thank you.
I've got a suggestion. On your last slide, you mentioned schools and hospitals. And my plea is that you add prisons.
Yes, indeed.
The budget for prisoners is
Wow. That's the interesting thing is the fact that about 10 years ago, a friend of mine had this vision of, you know, giving school meals, organic school meals to children, and the price point was something ridiculous. It was like £1.42 or something. But that's why this is just such a moment of change, because, as I say, that if we can tie in all these other duties, and that's why the functionality, this is why brilliant people like Jonathan Storkey at Rothamsted and Richard Pywell at the Centre of Ecology and Hydrology and our brilliant scientists are so important, because we need the data. And the scary thing is that at the moment that the Department of Business, Infrastructure and Energy, or I never know what it stands for, is not seeing enough evidence around investing in soil carbon. So this whole bit about evidence is they are preferring to take gaseous carbon and pump it under the ground because that's a cheaper, more verifiable way to do it. And I had a long conversation with brilliant scientists at CEH to say, how can we solve this? And so we do need the science, because if we get the science, we can enable them to buy it, because the local authority, and this goes down to the food standards, doesn't it, and labelling and, you know, attribution. This is where, you know, Adele's global farm metric fits in, because we're working very closely with Adele about how do you get a sustainability standard that enables us all to work to the same pitch. But yeah, no, exactly. I mean, the ambition is that everyone should have it, you know, and we could create that, hopefully. That's the aim. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry, sir.
Hello, Wilf Dimsdale from not far away from here, Measden. Terribly optimistic presentation, DEFRA, RPA, but in most of our experiences with DEFRA and the RPA, try to contact them, absolutely impossible. Yeah. Don't answer. It's getting worse and worse and worse. The swamp of bureaucracy, all your wonderful ideas are going to sink into the quicksand of bureaucracy.
Yeah, well, I think that's really so why we actually are trying to almost bypass that element. You know, that's why we're saying don't wait, take local action. And what is really extraordinary is that the environmental foundations and trusts, you know, who have quite a lot of resource, are the people funding this transition. And it's like, why should that be? You know, this is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, as I say, we've been lucky enough to get £500,000 worth of funding from 30 Percy, which is a trust that came from a farming family that had Ecova. You know, remember the washing powder that some of you use, Ecova? And their vision was that the system is so broken that they want to fund this transformation. And similarly, you know, you've got people like Samantha Roddick, who's Anita Roddick. She's funded a lot of this work as well, the 18 Foundation. But that is the challenge, is that we've created this governance that's so complicated that nobody knows how to go through it. And there's 1,500 new people in DEFRA. And I can honestly say, with sort of 25, 30 years worth of experience of bidding for funding, nothing is as complicated as bidding for an E.L.M trial. I mean, it nearly killed us. It was just, but I mean, I do love the people in DEFRA. Individually, it's not their fault. They're trying really hard. It's a very big oil tanker to steer.
But the individuals you deal with are really good.
Yeah.
But once they disappear into the quicksand, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have to deal with the quicksand.
And I think that one of the biggest challenges is institutional memory. So I find it really hard that, you know, I'm old enough to know that I've presented some of this stuff. You know, all of our integrated framework was researched in 2009. It's now internationally researched 3 times. It came out as being the most cost-beneficial environmental framework DEFRA could find on the globe in 2013. You know, and then it's just been researched again, and I've had to do another E.L.M trial to try and demonstrate something we know works. You know, that's the problem, and that you find that people just local action, you know, and actually embedding yourself in your own community, your district, your parish, you know, your catchment, working together. There is funding out there, and as I said, this is why I said so. You know, that DEFRA is over here, but there's like all this over here, and actually what is complex for people is how to access that. You know, it's like, you know, how do I do that? And I mean, that's really what a FWAG we try and do. I mean, literally, we're all from farming families. We're all constantly learning what are the local initiatives that are available for you to invest in. We're trying to maximise what we can get from the government if it's appropriate for you, and we're trying to understand how all these other opportunities which are coming on thick and fast, like the carbon and all of that, you know, is that a good deal for you, or is it going to somebody come and hit you with a stick in 10 years' time because there wasn't enough evidence? Sorry, thank you, sir. Oh, who's next? Sorry, this one.
Could I actually also make a comment about the previous question before I ask my question, which is actually very short? I'm actually a town mouse, surrounded by all you country mice. And I've only arrived in your community about 10 years ago. What strikes me, I'm also very lucky because I actually happen to farm in this village.
Oh, lovely.
So it means that John and Paul Cherry are therefore good friends of mine, are influencing me enormously in what I do. And in a way, that is an argument, proof of what you're saying. Also, this event is called Groundswell. Things don't happen from the top down. They actually happen from the bottom up. And it's small local groups, John and Paul being prepared to talk to this idiot who lives in the town about what the reality of your world is, okay? Makes all the difference in the world. I'm so excited because in one field, a colony of 70 bee orchids has become a colony of 200 bee orchids over the last 5 years because we've got rid of pesticides, we've got rid of herbicides and so on and so forth. I'm looking forward very much to talking to them about ELMs and asking if it is possible that a small town mouse like me can work with large country mouse like the cherries.
That's what the aggregation enables you to do.
That's the
one thing I'd also like to say is that I know a lot of people go, oh, I don't want to talk to my parish council, I don't want to talk to my neighbour, you know, because quite often there can be, you know, people have, you know, misunderstand each other, and that's another key role that we have is to say, actually, you know, we're all in this together, and so we can be a conduit for helping people to collaborate.
So my question as a town mouse is, do you have some case studies which I could access of collaboration between farmers, and what's really important is between different sizes and types of farm.
Yeah. So yes, we do have case studies, lots of case studies, but I really think now what we need to do is to take our geospatial mapping, look at what water body you're in, and obviously that's different topography, different parts of the world, of the country, and actually try and engage everybody. You can get all the field parcel data, I put one up earlier, to actually see who owns every field parcel. Because if you can do the whole water body, you can basically get, I mean, in the Thames Regional Flood and Coastal Committee, there's £800 million for natural flood management and flooding. You know, you as a group of organisations can actually then work with water companies around phosphate reduction and all of that sort of stuff. So I think the reason why alignment to the catchment-based approach to me is really important is to manage soil, you have to manage water. And to actually, across landscapes, we have to find places where we can hold water in times of flood, and how we can retain water in times of drought. And in doing that, we can then actually restore all our habitats and connectivity and slow flows and plant hedges and shelter belts and plant integrated trees and wood pasture and all of that stuff, and all the stuff that we've all talked about and learned about today. But it is going to be that aggregation to the point where the farmer clusters need to align to some of that out, not saying exclusively to a boundary, but, you know, to be able to get that. So yes, I would say that. So thank you. Hello. Sorry.
Thank you, Jenny, and I love your passion and I love your vision.
Sorry. Thank you.
Huge ambition. Fantastic. So we're on a journey and we don't get there very quickly, but seeing is believing. And seeing is believing is a really good response as an alternative to working with DEFRA and other bodies.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, when can we come and see what you're achieving, and how would you describe your first real milestone when you know you're on a journey that's going to deliver success?
Okay. So we've been doing case studies. The framework actually came from Common. I was a project officer for Heritage Lottery, and it was around integrated frameworks came around managing common land and complex landscapes. And then I thought, well, actually, if you joined everything up, that would work really well for community resilience. So it took me nearly 8 years to get the funding to do a community resilience project. So we did 20 communities in 2013 to 2016, where 20 communities were supported by an advisor. And that's where we had the £250,000 worth of contribution. And that was internationally researched. And then in 2016, we had Brexit. So in the last 15 years, every time I've got to the point where the government was about to invest millions of pounds in this framework, there's been a political shock, and I've had to start again. And so that actually we have the case studies. I mean, Joe's brilliant at keeping all the balls, who's holding the mic there she is. So Joe, the team helped deliver the stuff. But what's really interesting about this framework is it sounds complicated, but it's not. So we have the structures in place. So if you look at people like Action for Communities in Rural England, which is a non-government organisation, they work with the National Association of Local Councils. We can access every single parish council and town council really easily. Through the parish council, you can access every person that lives in those administrative areas. You can mobilise people, their skills, whatever that might be, arts or whatever. And so there is a structure by which we can do that. So what we've been dedicated to do is to create these case studies to say, it works, but it doesn't work unless you value your farming community. That's why I choose to work for FWAG, because we are passive, we are confidential, we can build trust with people, we can support our partners, and we can help people find their way, particularly farmers who have this crucial role to do this. So we've been lucky enough to lead on the catchment-based approach. We've had farmers, all of our projects have been farmer-led, so, involved in the Payments for Ecosystem Services pilots, natural flood management pilots. We've done a facilitation fund. We have 4 farmer groups. I represent 92 farmers in my catchment. We're linking all of that to neighbourhood planning through the rural community councils. So it's completely scalable. I mean, it could be scalable tomorrow. What I've been trying to get them to do in DEFRA and government is to put out advisors. It's a climate emergency. People need support on how to do this. Let's get 1,000 advisors out there who can give farmers and communities confidential support and get on and get this done, because it can be done and it can be scaled. But I feel weary because I had to spend another 18 months doing something I've already done, for nearly 10, 15 years. So the process, going back to this gentleman's comment, is that if we sit in a situation where we're constantly waiting for policy to solve this for us, it's not going to happen. I'll be dead. It'll keep happening. Every 5 years, I'll get to the point where they get it, and then the person will change, and it'll be like, I've got to start at square one again. But actually, we can all take action, which is why the environmental trusts and these other mechanisms, the only thing I haven't said is that in the food vision that Tamsin has, she's been working with the local authority, and the local authority are thinking about now funding these advisors out of business rates, because they can see how these advisors might actually benefit and join up all the economic, environmental and social challenges in our county. There's other pots we can get these advisors from. But in the meantime, all these amazing foundations are coming to our rescue. But the rest of us, to be quite honest, are run ragged trying to make this happen. So if anybody knows anybody who wants to fund 1,000 advisors for me, I'd be really grateful. Thank you.
Hello. Your talk is incredible, and I should introduce myself. I'm the Member of Parliament for South Devon, and the stuff that you are talking about in terms of the circular economy and making sure that you can make it work with local farmers producing for schools is something that we're trying to do in Devon to varied success. But I just wondered whether or not you might speak a little bit more about the role that supermarkets should be playing and how we can incentivize them to do more, to buy local, to support local farmers, to do all of this. Because right now, we're having no luck with bringing them to the table and trying to, as a mere backbencher, trying to get them to play ball.
Well, it's interesting you say that. Thank you, sir. And because we are doing a lot of work with supermarkets. So particularly, we've been delivering for Waitrose for quite a long time. We've been doing an M&S trial. But it's interesting because I think that they are, in fact, the M&S trial has used our methodology, which is really interesting. But I had a really inspirational conversation with Henrietta, I don't know if she's here. I was very fortunate to meet a lady from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation the other day, and they are tasking under their food strand, taking the 40% of food that is turned to reprocessed into something that's not healthy for us. And they are specifically working with you, aren't they, Adele, and others, to try and crack the supermarket ambition. So I think that there's so many people who are trying to create the standards around what this looks like. And I think if you look at the global farm metric that the Sustainable Food Trust are doing, is that it means that we can, if we all align, the supermarkets, what worries me about the supermarkets is you will end up with like, oh yes, this is a sustainable product, but right next to it there'll be the cheaper product. And somebody might go, oh, well, I'd really like to buy that because I care about wildlife and I care about flooding, but actually I can't afford it. So the whole thing around supermarkets has been in discussion for over 20 years. I mean, I've sat in things where, it's sort the supermarkets and we'll fix it. But that must come down to the fact that, if you're going to embed the Environment Act and we're all going to have to buy things that are sustainable, surely you hold them to account as well. I mean, if we could only get something like a carbon labelling that actually says, this is how much carbon, and all the veganism, I feel so sorry for young people that I think that they're doing the right thing by being vegans. And I often sit with my daughters and sons' friends and say, actually, pasta for life is much better, but they can't afford it. So, this whole thing around, food labelling, like I think the PFLA were launching yesterday, the clear message. But it needs to go further. You need to tell people they can't sell unsustainable products. I mean, just get the regulation in there. It's a global emergency. And that's what we need to do. And it's the inertia, and I think it's really difficult because I think for those of us who are actually on farms, we see the difference. I don't know. I was mortified because I live in a house that, when I grew up, had 54 house martin nests. And this year, for about 2 weeks, there were none. And I was like, oh my God, we aren't seeing the exposures to climate change in the UK because of our geography and where we are on the globe. It's not as bad, but it is happening. But around the world, there's mass extinctions happening all the time. There's people in poverty and flooding, and there's all sorts of stuff. And so, I'm digressing, but it is an emergency, And actually, the E.L.M has just been on. Oh no, let's not be very brave. Let's just stick to the World Trade rules. Let's just get some trade deals. And let's just go la la la, and we'll all be fine. We won't. And this is a once in a generational time to do this, and genuinely we can see a view. Thanks, sir. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But she's a lady called Jane Parker here wandering around from the farm, from the third farm in Gloucestershire, and they just brought over the first blood abattoir in the UK. So it's obviously a place for the truck that sits in their farmyard, but it's able to move around to support the local community. So everyone's looking into that. That's a really amazing case study of a local food.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think part of the ambition with the county-based data set is that we're allowing people to put forward what they need to do this. So in a sense that we don't care where the funding comes from to start off with. Obviously we want the funding ultimately because we want to integrate it. But, we want to be able to say, so we're mapping what food's coming out of Gloucestershire, and so we've put all that on a GIS map. And then we want people to tell us what are the infrastructure issues in their communities, how we can stop sewage going in the rivers, because that's quite important to me. We also want to look at what infrastructure we need to enable us to do that. And there are, if you look at the DEFRA's publications, there's lots more funding streams coming that might do bits and bobs. But, structure, please, sir, because people are bemused as to where to go. And the tragedy is there is going to be such change. I'll give you an example. I think I'm due to stop soon. Shout in a second. But when we went from a transition from the old environmental stewardship scheme to higher level stewardship scheme, there was one option that wasn't picked up, which was arable reversion. And we warned DEFRA for 3 years. And in Gloucestershire alone, 8,000 hectares of grassland got ploughed up because one option wasn't covered. And I think the biggest worry for me is at the moment they're incentivising almost degradation because they're saying it has to be additionality for E.L.M. But we're working on that because actually, if a farmer's going to get paid £600 to create grassland from an arable field that is already grassland that they can only get £95 for, it's a no-brainer. Anyhow, I'm digressing. Sorry, sir.
Can I just follow that with a specific question on
Yes, sir.
ELMs? So if I'm a reluctant farmer, and at the moment I'm in a mid-tier scheme, which my neighbour is, but I know it's filled in by the same guy. The paperwork's done by the guy who sells them sprays.
Yeah.
What are the three big changes that are going to take place for the reluctant farmer 3 years down the road in ELM?
Well, it's interesting you say that because I think it will be the polluter pays principle. So I was highlighting that at the beginning, is that a lot of conventional farmers who are making a lot of money, my son works on a conventional farm, big estate, they can't work out how to transition to regenerative agriculture because they've got 6 young families dependent on their business. And I just keep saying to them, that's absolutely fine, but watch what's coming, because I've talked to people like Richard Cole and people like head of water quality and DEFRA, known him for years. People like Arlene Rickard from the head of the Rivers Trust. There's all this issue around phosphate pollution impeding developments. And actually, what are these sticks going to be? And actually, all they keep doing is, we'll stop the farmers. And so I think it's really interesting because we don't know what that looks like. So they may choose not to engage. But if they get advice and support, and I can tell you this because we've given support to thousands of farmers who've been suspicious or anxious or cautious, but actually when you can realise that you can help. I actually volunteer for a farming help charity, and I go and see the person first. I don't see the land. I want to know, are you coping? Is this okay? How can I help you? And actually, once you build that trust, you can then start to bring those people on board. But actually, if they are going, I'm not going to do this, then I fear that there will be environmental regulations that may come in.
Last question, Jenny.
Oh, thank you. Sorry.
If you had the funding for 1,000 helpers, would you be able to find them?
It's very interesting you say that. So I teach a module called the Farming and Integrated Environmental Local Delivery module, field module at the Royal Agricultural University. I also teach applied farmland ecology. And every year, it nearly kills me because it's really hard to put it in, but every year I meet at least 30 or 40 young people who would love to do this. They are absolutely passionate about creating this change. They want societal change. They want fairness. They want equality. They want food. They want all the things that I've talked about today. And we've been saying to DEFRA, so I'm on the advice a sub-working group for DEFRA, and there's a lovely chap called John McNally who leads on that, who I think gets rather fed up with me. But, actually, we've been saying for nearly 4 years now, you need to train these people, and we set up this opportunity for people to have meaningful careers that are actually going to be transformative. And I can tell you, if you put that post out, you would have many young people coming forward to do that. And it's actually, what's interesting is that part of the problem is that what people tend to get, farmers tend to get given is ecologists or flood engineers or people coming out on their land. What you need is people who want those people to care about those people, to make those people part of and valued for the part of society that they are and their land that they own and the contribution that makes to their future. And actually, that's the bit I love, because actually Joe was on my module, and all the best ones, they just come along, But it's actually about putting assisters out there. It's about people who care and value and collaborate and communicate and trust and build that trust. It's not about putting, regulators or advisors or people saying you must do this on your land. It's about, and there is a whole society. There are so many wonderful young people. We need to do this for that generation, for our children's generation. And yes, I'd find them. Trust me. Thank you ever so much. Thank you.